Hey guys, welcome back to a second video for week 13 of the Axial Deadbolt budget build. This week is something that I've really been looking forward to. The part you see here in front of you is something most of you have probably never seen unless you're big frequenters of RCCrawler.com. What this part is the forward motor mount from ToyZuki. This thing is really going to change this car and how it's laid out. What this part does is this goes between the front frame rails all the way up by your front shock mounts. And it takes and relocates your motor, pinion, and spur gear all the way to the front. And then you have to run another drive shaft between that mount and your transmission that is still in the center there. But it is going to be a much reduced size version of your transmission. So without talking about it too long beforehand, we're going to start getting into this truck and showing you what it's going to take, because this is not one of the simpler installations that we've done so far. So take a look at what we're going to get done and see what you think and how it matches up to what you're willing to do with your truck. Now, in terms of the large battery placement that we had before with this 5,000 milliamp 3S pack, now this mod is going to be big on performance. What that is going to affect a little bit is the placement of batteries of this size. So that is something that you're going to have to consider when considering this mod in particular. This is definitely a performance mod. Huge gains in center of gravity and weight bias. So look at what we're going to do and then figure out if something like this is what is going to be best for your rig, if you're really looking for performance or if you really need to maintain those massive run times with a big pack. But let's jump right into this and start getting this thing installed. First, remove the transmission from the skid plate. Then remove the spur gear cover with the 3 screws going around the outside. Next, we're going to remove the slipper as well as the spur gear and slipper pads. Take special note of the 3 aluminum spacers that sit on that top shaft and set them aside carefully. Removing the 3 screws near the top of the transmission will free the motor plate with the motor attached. Next, we're going to reinstall that motor plate onto the new ToyZuki mount. Make sure to use the 3 countersunk screws that were included with the kit through the back side of the mount. Now we need to continue the disassembly of the center transmission. Remove the spur gear cover and then remove the last screw that was holding the 2 cases together. You will have to remove one of the sides of the drive shaft. Split the transmission case halves open and remove the top shaft. We're going to relocate this top shaft to the ToyZuki mount to hold our spur gear up there. It will need some modification to connect the drive shaft that's now going to go from this top shaft back to a top shaft that we're going to replace in that transmission. We will need to drill out the hole that previously had the pin going through it to hold that top gear in. After that, we need to shorten this top shaft slightly on that end. Test fit your drive shaft and see if the hole for the pin will line up with your other hole. Then slowly remove material from the end of that top shaft until those 2 holes line up. Do this in little chunks so that you don't take too much off the end of your top shaft. Now, the ToyZuki mount does require the use of a 3rd drive shaft. This will go from our top shaft at the ToyZuki back to our existing gearbox. For this, I'll be using an MIP setup. I will have a complete parts list below. Now, reinstall 2 of the 3 aluminum spacers that we took off in the earlier step. Follow that up with your first slipper disc, then reinstall your spur gear, then the last slipper disc, followed by your spring and the nut. Tighten that nut down all the way and then back it off roughly a half to a quarter of a turn. Kind of depends on your personal preferences. With it all reinstalled at this point, we will likely have to move our pinion just slightly to get full contact with those 32 pitch gears. Now we need to remove the cross brace that went in between the shock towers. Mine had already been modified, so it only took 1 screw on one side and then 2 on the other. Now the mount's ready to slide into the chassis. I did this without disassembling it by putting it in there and then just kind of turning it with a little bit of force. It'll kind of pop into place. Line up the holes on the side of the ToyZuki mount with the rear shock tower holes that we previously removed the spacer that went between the 2 sides of the chassis from. Put a little bit of Loctite on the screws to make sure that it doesn't back out in that aluminum motor mount. Now, on the passenger side front shock mount bolt, you will need to provide a countersunk screw and lock nut to retain it into place. Check your clearances and make sure everything is clearing. I am running a 3-link suspension. To run a 4-link suspension, you would have to make a custom set of links to make sure everything cleared. Now we need to replace the top shaft that we took out of the transmission. This one, we're going to use the older style top shaft that Axial used to provide. Again, check the description for the part numbers. We're going to drill out the hole that was closer to the threaded end this time. We do need to make this so that it clears a through pin like the drive shafts use. Reinstall the gear and bearings onto the top shaft just like they were when you took it out of the transmission. We are going to remove the cap that was on the back side of that top gear previously. Now the top shaft is actually going to point through the transmission case the opposite way that it did before. Reassemble the 2 halves of the transmission case and get this thing bolted back together. You can use shorter screws on the 2 sides of the transmission case to get rid of that extra thread on those screws. Or you can just run lock nuts further down on those screws and it'll hold it just fine. Now, we need to shorten this new top shaft. So we need to cut the end off where the threads were to allow a drive shaft to slide back on and line up with that hole that we drilled out for the drive shaft set pin. At this time, install that last spacer that we had from the previous top shaft and then install your drive shaft parts, making sure that the hole for the drive shaft lines up with the hole of our top shaft. Reinstall the transmission into the chassis and make sure all of your drive shafts are clearing all of the other parts. As you can see here, it places the motor as far forward and as low as possible. There are other mounts that move things forward, but none of them move it this low. It clears everything just barely. Make sure that your motor mount, everything clears all of the moving parts. At full compression, I can barely touch the drive shaft collar to the motor plate. A little bit of clearance on the motor plate will take care of that, but full compression of the suspension in that area, not likely to happen all that often either. That is going to conclude the installation of that front mount from ToyZuki. Now, that was a pretty in-depth install, but I will say that most of those steps are not that difficult. They may look a little intimidating, but really all it is drilling a couple of holes and then grinding a couple of shafts shorter. That's really all there is to it. So don't be too overwhelmed. You can handle it if you just take your time and do a little bit at a time, test fitting the parts as you go. I can't stress enough how important it is to just test fit as you go and take a little bit at a time. Really, in the end, you'll be fine doing just about anything in that case. Now, with the truck like it is, it could basically be a runner if our electronics were all installed, but they're not, because we did have to remove that Howler customs plate for a number of reasons. 1, this top mounted drive shaft now is in the way. 2, it removed the cross brace that the front of that battery plate mounted to. And 3, that motor in general is going to be in the way of where that plate was now. So, like I said, we are really going to have to reevaluate where everything sits and exactly how this is going to work. But again, that is going to be held off until next week, when we'll get a little bit further in depth on exactly how we're going to get all of this stuff exactly where we want it and make it look as good as possible. Because at this point, most of this stuff is going to be pretty set. We're just going to have to look at a handful of things as we go now. One is going to be probably replacing these plastic rock sliders down the road. And at that point then, the base of what we're looking at, pretty well set. I do have a couple of things down the road that I want to make sure that I think about while I'm placing electronics and things like that. But I'll try and make sure that those get placed in a way that isn't an issue down the road as well. With that, guys, hopefully these in-depth things, again, like the Burly tubes, are still right up your alley. I do think that this is kind of what I would like to push more and more, is that you guys can handle these harder, more in-depth type installs more so than just a simple type bolt-on. I really think that with just a little bit of confidence, all you guys should be able to tackle this stuff. With that said, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Also, ToyZuki on rccrawler.com. This is his product, and he is definitely one to support. So look for his threads on RC Crawler, and hopefully you can find any info you need if you can't get it directly from me. With that, though, guys, that's all for this week, and we'll see you on the next one.